And there are two things going on here. First of all, the academy, especially international relations scholars, more and more have little interest in going to Washington and influencing policy. They see themselves more as academics and not as individuals who should take their academic expertise and apply it to policy problems by advising people in Washington. And the question you want to ask yourself is, why is this the case? And it's because of the professionalization of the social sciences. What happens here is that whenever you create an academic discipline, what that academic discipline wants to do is turn itself into a profession. And professionalism is all about creating barriers, because you want to convince people on the outside that you have expertise that is not accessible to them. Let me give you an example. Think about lawyers. Lawyers do not want you to be able to read the law easily and serve as your own lawyer. If I want to get a divorce, right, I can't get a divorce by myself because I can't figure out what the rules are, because these lawyers speak in a language that's completely foreign to me, even though I have a PhD. And I've spent a great deal of my life doing Talmudic scholarship. I can't figure out what the law says about X, Y, and Z. So I have to get a lawyer. Doctors are the same way. Have you ever noticed that doctors these days are quite upset with the internet? Because what the internet allows patients to do is diagnose their problem before they go to see the doctor. And that puts them on a level playing field. And doctors don't want that. Professions are all about creating boundaries that separate we experts from the hoi polloi, right? That's what you want to do, right? And you want to speak in a language that they don't understand. If you speak in simple English and they can understand you, they can argue with you, and your expertise doesn't look so good, right? You begin to understand what I'm talking about, right? It's professionalization. Right? It happens in every developed country. So what's happened over time in the United States is that the social sciences, and this includes IR, has become professionalized. And as a profession, right, we see ourselves operating in a rather narrow realm. And the idea of going to Washington, right, doesn't sit well with how we think about ourselves. So you would be amazed at the number of young scholars who I have talked to who simply refuse to go to Washington and advise policymakers. They think that is not our job. Our job is to develop expertise in the academy and let it flow downhill to Washington. So that's one half of the problem. The other half of the problem, and this will make perfect sense to you, is that back in the 50s and the 60s, when they went to Harvard, the reason they went to Harvard was because you did not have a lot of intellectual capital in Washington, D.C. There were not a lot of think tanks. There were not great universities in Washington. There was not this vibrant policy community that exists today. So what you have in Washington are large numbers of people who are outside the government or even inside the government who don't want people from Harvard coming down to Washington and taking those wonderful jobs that they themselves want. So people in think tanks, people inside particular administrations have no interest in encouraging academics to come to Washington and to have policy influence. And as I told you previously, at the same time, those academics have less and less interest because of professionalization to go to Washington. So this gets back to the starting point where I told you a lot of people tend to think that policy and theory are like oil and water. They just don't mix. And a lot of that just has to do with the phenomenon that I was talking to you about, the relationship between the academic world and the policy world in Washington. Policymakers don't want academics taking jobs that they might fill, right? And academics don't want to go to Washington because they think they're doing science or they're doing theory, and that's not what policymakers do. So you have this unfortunate situation. Why I think this is a bad thing. I think in a democracy, to make it work as efficiently as possible, it's very important that you have institutions that are protected and in which people can speak truth to power. This is why freedom of the press is so important. It's why it's so important to have highly aggressive media. You want people in the media to question the government. It's very important for purposes of keeping the government honest. You want people who can speak truth to power. And again, that's why freedom of the press is so important. Another institution that has been created to allow people to criticize the government and speak truth to power are tenured professors. Ole pointed out, quite correctly, that I have said and written many controversial things in my career. It's true. I can do that for one very simple reason. They can't fire me. Right? They can't fire me. I believe that you have a responsibility as a tenured professor to engage in big issues, to engage with big issues, and if you have a particular viewpoint, especially if it's a minority viewpoint, you have a social responsibility to engage and to state that view. This is what makes democracy work. We operate on the assumption that having a marketplace of ideas and having debates inside of that marketplace is very important for coming up with the right policies. But if you have academics with tenure who are not interested or not willing to participate in the big debates of the day, you are losing out in a really important way, because these individuals are in positions where they can say uncomfortable things to the reigning policymakers in Washington or in Copenhagen or in Berlin or in any country. Again, it is very important for academics to participate. So my bottom line with regard to the relationship between the academy and the policy world is I think that we in the academy do an excellent job of producing theories. We have a robust body of theories, which, by the way, does not just include liberalism and realism. Liberalism and realism just happen to be the two dominant theories, in my opinion, in the United States and elsewhere around the world. We do a good job in the academy of producing theories, but where we have really failed, at least in the United States, in recent years, is weighing in on the policy debates of the day. And I think that has hurt us as a country. And I think what I said about the Iraq War is evidence of that. I think if more academics had weighed in vigorously and opposed the war in Iraq more vigorously, we might not have had the war, and I think the United States would be better off for that, and I certainly think the Middle East would be better off for that. So with that, I will conclude and gladly take questions.